Okay, welcome everyone to Perseus Conversations. And today we have Victoria joining us.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to do this.
Well, thank you. And I think we have, there was lots of questions online. There was lots of questions that we already had. So we're going to try and get to as many as we can. I suppose we'll just get right into it, shall we? The first set of questions we had was about other magical systems, because we know you obviously as a Bardonist, but obviously you've got a big history behind you. So the first one let's look at, you've talked before about things like the fourth way and Buddhism. What key insights or techniques, have you taken from those things and brought into what you do now?
Yeah, one thing I really appreciate practicing or learning from other esoteric systems is different frames of reference and language for the types of work you can do. I can go over a couple things with Gurdjieff's fourth way system. And one of the things is about developing and activating higher centers within your body. So they don't use the chakra language we're familiar with, but they have their own language within the system for centers. But it's about learning how these centers within ourselves may be kind of just mechanically happening, but how you can begin to observe them, consciously work with them, but also activate the higher centers within you. So you can maybe think about like Eastern systems, awakening or activating chakras, but then a crystallization process. So the crystallization idea is kind of like in alchemy. You have these base metals, but through certain internal work, you can start to crystallize higher energies within you so that as you go through life and your incarnation, you start to carry higher frequencies with you. Sometimes, depending on the magic tradition, you may be able to activate those things, bring them down, but then, you discharge them after the meditation, the prayer, the ritual. And there's times where you might not want to carry those around you all the time because everything around you can see you and feel you and be attracted to the energy, but there could be a method by which you start to crystallize these things inside of you. The Gurdjieff system also has a strong direction towards people being awake. And it's not in the sheeple kind of way, but that everyone is asleep. Their consciousness is not awake. They are not aware of what they're doing. They're living in daydreams and imagination. So the Gurdjieff system's really about awakening your consciousness, which we can find in other systems again, and being fully embodied with an awakened consciousness in your day-to-day. And when I was in Gurdjieff schools and met Gurdjieff people, I met people who can periodically awake, and I have the experience of awakening occasionally. It always catches me off guard when it happens because I always think, oh, I am awake. But then I'll be in the middle of a grocery store and then the lights are on and I look around. I'm like, oh my gosh, everyone's walking around in their daydreams. And I can see their daydreams. I can see clearly on their face, what they're thinking and dreaming about, their imaginations about their life. And we take for granted just how deep we get into these dreams we have about our life.
Wow. Yeah, that's the thing I think with that, isn't it? It's like it sounds so simple, yet when you have one of those experiences, you think, well, if I'm more awake now, but I thought I was awake, what was I before? What am I now? And then that can exponentially expand.
Yeah, and then you fall right back into a sleep, and then you kind of forget about it again until you wake again, and you're like, "Oh my gosh, I was in sleep for months, and I totally didn't realize it."
Crazy.
It is. Another thing I liked about the Gurdjieff system is they had something called sacred movements, where kind of like Tai Chi or any kind of or yoga. There were certain movements that were developed to mimic the movements of the universe and to activate those things in your microcosm. And one thing I liked about this is through my own practice, I've also discovered something I call divine yoga. That's not a term I got anywhere, but when I've touched higher planes, I found myself energetically doing movements that felt like divine yoga on a very higher sphere. We're just like little movements energetically, so refined, begin activating things to trickle down into the chain of manifestation.
Interesting. Yeah, that mirrors a lot of other systems I've seen. Yeah, but you're just getting that naturally through contact with those areas.
Yeah, and then it's a byproduct of being there, and you just kind of do it, and you're like, oh, I guess you don't consciously think before I'm going to go learn and do this. You're just embodying it, and you start to do it. Sorry, hiccuping.
No problem. Wow, very interesting. Yeah, it's I think there's a lot of parallels there to some other things that some other people have been saying as well. Have you got any more on the Gurdjieff system?
Well, not on the Gurdjieff, but I can talk a bit about Buddhism. I've trained in Zen Buddhism, Tibetan Buddhism, Nichiren Buddhism, and I had a teacher that I believe had a Shingon Buddhism background that I was introduced to. One of the main things I've taken away from Buddhism is emptiness in the Heart Sutra, namely understanding when you work with energy that there is the emptiness behind it. And from a Hermetic's perspective, we can maybe consider that Akasha. So say you're feeling angry. Behind that angry is emptiness, like identifying that anger is just arising for a moment, and it may feel so vivid and real, but then 20 minutes later, it may disappear. But then realizing also kind of life, and at one level of reality, everything, of course, matters, has an impact. Then also things kind of arise and fall. When you also kind of think about throughout humans' history, all the lives that lived, they all gradually built up to the present, but then there's so many things that have been lost to the dust. And then also kind of that Buddhist perspective of really going into mindfulness and presence, because everything's going to arise, come and go. But in the present, being mindful is kind of where you can start to pierce through Maya, to use Buddhist terminology, and kind of attune your state of being into something different. In Buddhism, I also did some deity work with Buddhist gods. The 8 verses of thought transformation were really important to me, especially in my early training of just trying to cultivate my perspective. And I also appreciate Buddhism or even Taoism because it can counter kind of the heavy egregore in Christianity about light versus dark, good versus evil. Like I've been pulled into that and I've got wrapped up in that energy. And sometimes it could be intense and not good for your mental and emotional health. But I like that Buddhism and Taoism kind of, because I don't disregard Christianity. I acknowledge the Christian path, but also the Buddhist path and the Taoist path. I'm more of a universalist. But within Buddhism or Taoism, kind of realizing everything has a natural order that's going to evolve, unfold. And just kind of being present and aware, and the perspective and the point of view is very different within Buddhism towards, say, your challenges or your hardships, where, say in Christianity, it may be devils and demons and forces of darkness that you're having to deal with.
So this way it's framed basically kind of maybe can help you have a less stressful life sometimes as well when you see it from that perspective.
Yeah, and they're energetic containers. Like I can kind of step in and out of any egregore, like religious egregore, but it's kind of like, which one do I want to be engaging with now, based on whatever direction I'm heading at this moment.
They can choose. Wow, very interesting. Let's move on to something that kind of bridges from the Buddhism and those things to our next 2 questions. So these I think overlap a little bit as well. So I'm going to speak about these 2 questions together. So the first question will be here: about the East and Western perspectives, and you've covered a little bit of that there as well. Where do you see the overlap between the Eastern and the Western perspectives, and how complementary are they to each other? And also, the next thing, which may be part of that answer, is also in regard to the internal arts. And when we say internal arts here, I'm personally referring to more the internal martial arts, but that could, we can have something else there as well. Maybe Xingyi, Tai Chi, Bagua. What benefits do these arts bring to the path, if any at all?
Yeah. So the interesting thing about Eastern and Western is many of us have heard the idea that, the Eastern seeks to transcend the physical world, and the Western seeks to embrace it. But both have heavy traditions of inner adept work. And I think we can't find like a one size fits all, because even within Eastern traditions, say even within Buddhism or Taoism or different internal martial arts systems, they're all going to have their own philosophy and dictation on what you want to do. So there may be Eastern systems where, say Taoist systems where the adepts do work heavily on, no, we're going to activate everything in the physical. The internal martial arts are heavily physically based, for example. So those originate in the East. But they are about, being familiar with your personal energy, different types of energy, whether it's your chi, your, environmental energy, shen, depending on the system, they're going to have different energies you can identify, if you're doing like Kung Fu, different animal energies. And I find, I started with internal martial arts. I was doing a little bit of like low magic before, but I found internal martial arts was incredibly activating for doing an internal power system. Because internal martial arts, say in Bagua, like I'm learning how to do spiral energy, or in Xingyi, the elemental energy, or Tai Chi, circular energies. And you learn how to, say, for example, you're learning to work with your danten and how to shock people with your fingers through your danten, or for example, or how to use sticking energy to stick to your opponent's arm and use that force to draw them to the ground. That is learning how to work with different types of energy. And similarly, in Franz Bardon tradition, you're learning to work hands-on with energy as well, but it's a little bit different. You may be working with the elements, or learning how to work with vital breathing, or differentiating between the astral plane and the mental plane, or what it's like to work with Akasha or non-dual light.
So, I think from your answer there, and also from my own perspective, I think particularly for Bardonists, I think the internal arts training, though not required, can certainly give maybe a boost in terms of having an experience with these energies and kind of knowing what you're looking for. Would you agree?
Absolutely. And I think the internal martial arts gives you the physical training, which may not be readily available. We're kind of given freedom to just decide what kind of physical training we want to do with, say, Franz Bardon system. But if you are in a system or school where you are given tools and language for energy, that's going to develop your fascia, your tendons. You're going to learn how to throw people energetically, things like that. So like in internal martial arts, your body becomes the weapon. You don't need a sword or a knife. And I feel like it's the same in magical practice, internal power systems. You become the powerhouse. You become the vehicle. And that's where the both can really complement each other.
Perfect. That's why I love it. Yeah, I love the fact that we're not reliant on a tool or something external to ourselves. Okay, well, you mentioned Franz Bardon there. Let's bridge on we've got some Franz Bardon questions. The first being, as you are known as an experienced Bardon student, what do you consider to be the core practices or principles at the heart of this system? Of course, there's various opinions out there, and what makes it unique? You've mentioned a little bit about it compared to other systems.
So I think one of the core practices or principles of his system is, one, it's fairly self-initiatory. Of course, you can be in schools, but also the very rigorous outline. So for example, if we were an Thelemic order or the Golden Dawn, there would be an outline as well too, but it would be based on meeting other people and their agreement that you can go to the next step. So one thing I've mentioned before, and that what really attracted me to focus on the Bardon system, is your development's really in your own hands. If you do the work, some schools, like, you have to wait a year before you can get initiated to the next level. With Bardon system, if you master an exercise in 3 months, you can go to the next exercise. What I also find very compelling about Bardon system, and I'm not sure if I've seen this really articulated elsewhere, but one thing that I really resonate with about it is it's really a blueprint for developing your microcosm to the macrocosm. You're learning how to work with the 4 elements, the planes of existence, your 3 bodies. You learn how to travel to the different planets, extrasolar, and you can kind of be more one-tracked mind. Say you want to focus on being a blacksmith. You can be a blacksmith magician. But if you want to be like totally exposing yourself to the library of the macrocosm, Franz Bardon's system really gives you that tools. You can speak with all the elemental heads that, rule their kingdom. You can meet spirits and zongerling of the earth, all the planetary heads. You can go extrasolar. And you start to appreciate, what is this clockwork? What is this mechanism behind this universe that we're living in, or this solar system? So I feel like it gives you, it can give you very advanced esoteric education, if that's your inclination, to really try to mirror and understand what is my relationship as a microcosm to the macrocosm, and how do I want to have that relationship grow or develop myself more towards the macrocosm.
So that freedom to to explore your own path, but really an opportunity for universal, kind of whichever way you want to go. Yeah, I mean, you're mirroring a lot of things of why I love it. All right, let's move on to number 5. Our next question. So many questions for you. People have got very curious, I think, to know your answer on lots of different things. So here we are. In what ways has Bardon system changed or evolved for you over your many years of study? And also, have your goals shifted, which what you just said possibly could have?
Yeah. So at the beginning, if I set my eyes on the end all be all, but that kind of set me up for failure at the beginning, because I wasn't looking at the steps before me. So I started tripping over myself because I was trying to assess, this is where I am, and I need to become something completely different. So that kind of psyched myself out a bit as well. But over time, as I, met more people and started to find new ways to approach how I was going to do the system, it became, okay, I'm getting tools under my belt. These are exercises to show up for, to learn, to cultivate, to have proficiency in. But I'm just adding to my universal tool belt of things I can do, whether as a magician or an internal martial artist, as a metaphysician. These are things that are helping me learn, and also how to kind of evolve spiritually. Like, okay, if you want to be clairvoyant, you can do these exercises. If you want to astral project, you can do these exercises. And with the question on have your goals or focuses shifted at all, they kind of have. I'm at an interesting crossroads because I've touched on all three of the books: Initiation into Hermetics, Key to the True Kabbalah, and Practice of Magical Evocation. So I'm not practicing as intensely as I have before. Right now, I mainly do invocation. Sometimes I'll do some other things, but I'm kind of in this, what would be like a germination period. I'm like, okay, I know I can go get super deep into, I'm going to meet every head in PME, or I'm going to try to not just experience the letters, but find some to master. But I'm like, that's not what, like, I don't feel like I want to kind of like bust doors down, but kind of sit patiently and quietly and think, okay, where do I want to go from here? But I'm keeping the wheels turning.
Yeah.
I'm still practicing, because I know if you don't, it's easy for things to kind of fade away. But I don't feel any kind of pressure about it, because as I might talk about later in some of our questions, that I always feel like these things are always with me. And once I decide to pick it up, like decide where I want to go, and then when you have experience with the other side as well, which is where my frame of reference is operating from, is like my physical body, she may be in a holding pattern right now while she's trying to figure out what she wants to focus on magically next. But on the other side, once I align with that, it's just going to click and unfold.
Yeah, absolutely. I can relate to that. It comes and goes, isn't it? It ebbs and flows, and there's a plan to it. Well, let's move on to the last one. There really is. I mean, you've kind of said things about it, but I mean, maybe early on, we can look at early on in your practices. What was the most challenging for you personally? When you were practicing, going through Franz Bardon's steps.
Yeah, I've mentioned this before, but one of the not in this interview, but I think our written interview with you is one of the things a teacher told me is I had to master 20 minutes of thought observation, and I had to record.
Oh, that's true. Yes, I remember.
Yeah, and every single impression in the exact order, and I couldn't miss one.
That's pressure.
And it wasn't just thought, but also clairsentient impressions. So that really tripped me up, because I'd get to like, I don't know, maybe 5 minutes.
That's a high bar.
Yeah, and I'd be like, I don't know if I put them in the exact order. Yeah. Is there something I forgot? But I think one of the biggest challenges was also deciding I'm going to do this no matter what, because I started with Bardon 20 years ago. I only got so far. So before getting stuck on step 1, I did like an immersive training to like step 5 with a group over like a summer. And I had been doing some of the exercises, but I was like, no, I kind of want to do it by what Bardon says. But once I decided I'm going to do this, because I had explored every other kind of system that was available to me. And I realized, sorry, I have to hiccup. These other ones aren't giving me what I want. They're not giving me what I need. And the Bardon system, it clearly says what you can do if you stick to it, what you can learn. And I loved that it was kind of in your hands. Like I had went to be initiated in a Tibetan Buddhist school, and they gave me early access to attend one of their Chenrezig rituals, even though I hadn't been initiated yet, because I let them know I'd worked with Chenrezig previously from another mentor who had initiated me into the Chenrezig deity work. So I thought I was going to get initiated, but then when I read the pamphlet, it says you have to forego every other tradition and do exactly what your teacher tells you to do.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I said, I really appreciate you guys, but I can't do this. And the Tibetan Buddhist leader was very wise. He took me out for coffee. He was familiar with Bardon and the Gurdjieff system. And he says, it shows that you really care, because you read these vows and you took them seriously, and you know that you couldn't do it. But I think also the mind trips kind of get you, but also the discipline and the repetition. So 1, get over the mind trips. decide you want this. Like, you have to have a fervor and a hunger for it, to do it day and night, and also discipline and repetition to show up. Because I think sometimes people think, oh, I sat and did this exercise for 2 weeks and nothing's happening, and they get frustrated, you know. But if you're like, okay, because I had moments like that in my early exercises, and I'm like, do you know what, nothing's happening, but I'm just going to keep showing up and make it part of my daily ritual to do this exercise, rather than focusing on the outcome. Focus on the process. And that's where things really change. And I also found, if I just did the exercise once or twice back to back, I might not have had progress. But if I focused on the exercise for 30 minutes and did it, or an hour, and did it 5 or more times in a row in one sitting, then it really starts to open up.
That's really true. That's really true. Yeah, you could do one sitting one time for a year, or you could do probably a week of multiple times in one sitting, and you'd see more breakthrough. Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Very cool. Let's move on. We are halfway through. Let's now look at evocation and mental wandering. First of all, let's look at the evocation. Now, this is obviously something that people think, let's get to the evocation stage, and it's all very exciting. For those newer to evocation, what advice would you give to them on how to develop the skills necessary to do what we would say, I don't know what we'd say, authentic evocation? Because there has to be, I think, some standards in there as to what we can determine is a true evocation, and also how can they do that safely without becoming unstable and unsettling their life in the process?
Yeah, those are great questions. So first, I think you need to have some clair skills enabled to evoke: clairvoyance, clairaudience, clairsentience. You can have spirits around you all the time talking to you, but unless your channels are opened up, you're not going to be aware of them. You're not going to hear them, see them, be able to communicate with them. Some people use all senses. Some people might only go with clairvoyance, or just clairaudience, or clairsentience, or one might be stronger than the other. But you need to have an ability to use your spiritual senses. Also, I feel like with Franz Bardon's initiation into Hermetics, it helps kind of temper your energy bodies. You learn, like, these sensory exercises are actually building filters for your senses. Like, they're kind of honing your I don't want to say shield, that's kind of harsh, but your screen, or as you're working with the elements, your energetic aptitude, your personal energy is becoming more robust. And then kind of as you go, like, you learn how to, say, dispel energies. So when you do invocation, I feel like one of the most important things is you need to know yourself, being able to kind of stand in your own self-sovereignty and authority. Because depending on the nature of the spirit, they might kind of push you around, or be like, oh, you're a silly little human, I'm going to have fun with you and play with you. But then also the type of spirit that you try to contact. If you're trying to contact a maleficent spirit, and you have a very weak and easily compromised person, like, that's not going to be very good for you. You're probably going to get it taken advantage of, and it could lead to, like, mental health issues, karmic issues, things like that.
Yes,
but then also, so developing the skills safely and effectively would be also kind of having a plan in mind on what you kind of interaction you want to have with these spirits. So for me, I come a lot to it from, like, a social perspective. I go on the other side, and many, I'm like, oh, I kind of know you already, it's been a while, so I'm not trying to be their master, commanding them to be my slave to do something. And you think about it, these spirits, they are embodying their true nature, their authority. Like, they are heads. You give them the respect they deserve. You know,
Yeah.
they treat them kind of like an honored guest, a nobility, not like in a groveling way, but like, oh, I honor and respect what you've done to cultivate. You don't have to communicate that, but you can kind of carry that presence within you. And you know, but then you meet them on that vibration as well, because it's like, I respect you, we respect each other. Let's have a dialogue.
Absolutely. I suppose as we get more mature, how we treat people in life as well, isn't it? It's you know, it mirrors that respect. We can't expect a rewarding conversation if there's no respect there to start with.
Yeah, absolutely. And for preparation, it was actually a 60 skills mental wandering course that really changed things for me. I was at the mental wandering stage in initiation to Hermetics. I'd only been looking at it over maybe a week, 2 or 3, but then I saw a 60 skills mental wandering course. Decided to try it, and then it just, you know, it worked for me pretty quickly, and I was surprised. And then after I did it for his technique for maybe a few weeks or a month. I can't remember how long. I then developed the ability to just naturally do it. Like I didn't have to go through the entire steps to kind of activate it.
So had you done like the sitting in front of the mirror exercise from Bardon's, or you just went straight to the 60 skills one?
So I had tried the sitting in front of the mirror, and I had done that not very long. Actually, I probably only did it like 3 or 4 sessions, and I was kind of mulling over it for a few weeks, like, oh, I'm at the stage, I need to start doing this. But then kind of at the same time, the 60 skills course was available. And I'm like, oh, this is kind of also mental wandering. Let me try this technique.
Wow. Okay, that's very cool. So that sort of solved that issue. I think for many it seems a possibly not streamlined, but it seems a more results seem to consistently come sooner. Specifically for people who have maybe problems with the visualization clarity or something like that, they can seem to be able to get the results a little bit sooner, I think, with that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that leads us on to the next question, which is again on mental wandering. But you know, I mean, in terms of usage and you know the benefits you found of mental wandering, you know, can you tell us a little bit about that? And maybe, you know, do you use mental wandering more or less than official evocations? How's that been for you?
Yeah. So for invocations, I'll either bring the spirit into my mental field or I'll travel to their mental field. Right now, I'm mainly focusing on invocation, but before that, I was doing a lot of mental wandering. And sometimes I do that, but right now, more invocation being brought into my mental field. But the benefits I found from developmental wandering to explore the inner and outer planes is just a very mind-blowing perspective and kind of understanding, because our minds are conditioned to this plane and kind of our day-to-day, the things we see, the things we can touch. And, you know, we're aware of mental phenomena, but to be fully immersed in that on the other side and to acknowledge and see there's other planes, there's other spheres, there's other beings, there's other things kind of happening simultaneously besides what's happening here on Earth. It kind of gives you a larger perspective. But it was also a very welcoming experience because I already had a cognizance of my relationship with the other side. But then rather than just feeling it, you know, while I'm in my body, to then be able to travel to the other side and connect with that and feel that has been very empowering. And then also kind of understanding time a little bit differently when you're on the other side, you know. It kind of can be mind-boggling for me because I tend to have a specialty in time, space, past, present, and future. So sometimes when I'm on the other side, I can have several lifetimes kind of flash before my eyes, or different forms I've embodied when I've been not incarnated, but, on the astral plane.
Mm.
So it's very fascinating. And I feel like one thing that people may not realize, but I think on an unconscious level or a subconscious level, one reason that people are attracted to magic is because they have an awareness of energy and these states of beings, and say, maybe a memory of having power and magic when they were on the other side, and like being a magician in this life. You can learn how to do those things again, but while having a physical body.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing more exciting, I think. I mean, once you know, I think, my goodness me, what else would I want to do? Wow.
Yeah.
It's very cool. So, I mean, the next question, I think you've kind of already answered, but I mean, in terms of what your main guide was, but from what you've been saying, it sounds like initially you very much did it by the book, but then later on you did it much more through intuition. Would that be correct? In terms of what you were seeking, what spheres or spirits you were going to see?
Yeah. So when I first started with mental wandering, I was working with a planetary book that Bob Smith hasn't published yet. So I was going through each planet. So I was starting with going to each planet, but it wasn't to contact a spirit. It was channeling each planet's energy, and then I would mental wander there. So first bringing that planet's energy into my mental field, and then projecting out of my mental body, and then going to that planet's sphere to commune. So I would just show up. I was kind of interested in finding my own way and not having my mental wandering experience colored by spirits that I was contacting.
Great point. Yeah.
Yeah. So like I would go and I would meet spirits. Many times I didn't ask their names, but I wrote our stories down of the conversations we had, maybe what they looked like, the places they took me to, the things they showed me. And then I worked through each planet, and I kind of found my own relationship with the planet. So it was kind of more of a personal path working. So, whether it was Mars or Mercury or, Saturn or Pluto, saying like, oh, this is my individual relationship with this planet. So rather than I'm coming here to learn from the people or the spirits who kind of rule certain facets of this domain, it's just let me show up and feel what it's like to be here. But then I started. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, sorry. Carry on. We had a delay. Continue.
Oh, okay, sorry. But then I started opening PME, practice magical evocation, and deciding, okay, I'm ready. So I've been contacting PME spirits for I don't know how long now, but at least a year. Where and I'm not going in order either. Sometimes I'll go with intuition. I'll sit down and something says, find a Mars spirit, and I guess Mars isn't in PME. I don't think he is. Or like, okay, find a spirit from the sun, or why don't you find one spirit from all the 4 elements today, and just contact all.
Go with that.
Yeah, go with.
That's a cool way of doing it. Yeah, I mean, we're spoilt for choice, aren't we, with PME?
Yeah.
Well, we've got two other questions. But really, this is just really sort of how people would. I think you've answered a lot of this, and people can kind of draw their conclusions from what you've said. But for people that are possibly new to this entire field, and also, I would add on an extra bit here as well. Possibly people who are new to Bardon's, but they are experienced with other traditions. What advice would you give to just genuinely new people to this whole field, and those coming from other traditions to Bardon's? How should they approach the work other than what you've already said?
Yeah. So first, read his system, get a handle on what does it offer, decide, is this something I'm interested in and I want to commit myself to? One of the biggest things that changed the practice for me was community and talking with others on this path. So whether it's one-on-one, whether it's in Facebook groups, Discords, Perseus Arcane Academy has some schools and teachers available and coursework you can take. There's other Bardonists who have private magical schools as well. Finding a community can really help, because, it's a very personal practice, but also it's a very important practice to you. So there is an element of silence, but some people, like to publicly share, like myself. You feel a calling to share. But the community and the mentors, I feel like, also really widens your horizon on the potential within the Bardon system. As I tend to say, it's a universal system. So depending on the kind of person you are, it's like a hat that once you put it on, it's going to kind of shape to you, and it's going to look like something that's different to you. So not every Bardonist is going to be the same. They might come from different esoteric backgrounds or traditions. So if you assess the Bardon system, you can look to people in the community and learn from them, but then also acknowledge, okay, this is an individual and this is kind of what they did with it and how they took it and run with it. But then also, if you know yourself, whether through a magical system you've already done or through doing soul mirror work with Franz Bardon's system, you can get a sense of, okay, well, who am I and what is it that I want to do with this system? Because with initiation into Hermetics, that's kind of getting a lot of the tools under your belt. But once you go into PME, practice of magical evocation, and KTQ, keys to the true Kabbalah, you have a lot more free reign on what kind of magician do I want to be? What do I want to focus on? Where do I want to go from here? You can decide to be a specialist. You could decide to be a generalist. You can choose a few different topics you're really interested in. So, it's full of potential. And I think one of the best things to do is just to decide if I want to start, like to just start, and to acknowledge time is going to pass regardless. 5 years, they're going to go by, whether you practice magic or not. But if Franz Bardon's system is attractive to you and you think it'd be worthwhile, like just do it. And don't put like the pressure on yourself of, I have to become a flame sword wielding mage. Just be like, you know what, I'm just going to do this. Like, I brush my teeth every day and I do my laundry. Let me just make this part of my daily habit. And, let me be surprised by myself. Because also, as you go through, at least this is my personal experience, your relationship with the system is going to change. Sometimes it's been very challenging and I've hit walls where I've had to work through. Other times it's been very liberating and invigorating, and tons of doors opening up one after the other, after the other, after the other. That's also kind of life as well. So those are kind of some of the things I would say about, if you're into Bardon's system, kind of take these things as food for thought, but also decide, okay, if I'm going to do it, but then also give yourself grace and understanding, like, it's going to be easy sometimes, it's going to be difficult sometimes, but if you see the gem in it, it's definitely worthwhile to go after.
I couldn't agree more. Yeah, I think that's it. It's just do it regardless, isn't it? Regardless of ups, downs, whatever else happens, just like brushing your teeth, as you said. Yeah, it's and then that way, no pressure.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow. Some superb answers, Victoria. Is there anything else you'd like to add at all, or any subjects that we've missed?
I think there's two. If you wanted me to share any experiences with mental wandering or working with the spirits, I can.
You kind of did a little bit of that, but if there's more to come, absolutely. I think we'd all like to hear any specific stories you have.
Okay. It took me a while to kind of comb through my journal, but I know people kind of like mental wandering, astral projection, spirit invocation stories, because those are kind of fun illustrations. So I found one semi-benign, but to kind of give it an illustration for those who may have not mental wandered to a planet before, what the experience can be like. And this is an example of one time I went to Mars on my own. So it wasn't by contacting spirit, but just my experience there. So as I had mentioned earlier about kind of not knowing where I wanted to go before, this started with me just kind of sitting in my meditation chamber, starting to be aware of my body and my plane and deciding kind of, okay, where do I want to go? Do I want to go to Jupiter? Do I want to go to Saturn, the sun? Then my mind finally turned on, like, no, let's go to Mars. So I crash in Mars and I'm surrounded by a red landscape. And then I'm standing next to a warlord. And I'm wondering, oh, is this the same warlord I stood next to before? I start to get kind of energetic downloads about my warrior self. And Mars is very interesting if you have a resonance. I had a strong vitality and vigor for war starting to infuse in me. I felt very kind of war driven. But then understanding kind of war deities I've worked with before, getting communications about that. I want to be kind of cognizant of the time. But one thing I got in Mars...
12 minutes.
12 minutes? Okay. But also kind of learning about like the integrity of ethos of war while I was there. Talking about kind of the Hierophant card and its relationships to Mars. But kind of a phenomenon I had there was like, it started bubbling in my psyche. I want to say it wasn't bloodthirsty, but it was like a passion to act. I wanted to be on a horse riding into battle with like a war flag or a sword on me. And then, so in each planet, there's also a core of the planet. So you have the kind of peripheral energy, but then you can also travel into the planet's core, each planet's core, for kind of a different signature. So in this instance, I went to Mars Center, and it is very kind of Akashic energy. And another kind of interesting thing is during the same trip, I had a sense of beings trapped under Mars, and a sense that maybe I could release them, but feeling, oh, I don't want to interfere with anything that's mandated. But I ended up going back another time and having a spirit lead me underground in Mars, and I found the released spirits and I untrapped them.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and then I sent them to the sun sphere so they can be regenerated to be reincarnated. And then the being that kind of helped me do this, we had to kind of broker and navigate with the guardians that were kind of keeping them. So it's kind of very fantastical. Mental wandering journeys can be. You feel like you're in a fantasy novel sometimes.
Quite a wonderful story, yeah. Do we know why they were under there?
I don't, but I just had this impression the first time I went of beings that I should maybe release. And then I went back and I did it. And the spirit's kind of holding them. I don't have that entry next to me. I already don't know where to find it. They were kind of saying, I had to be a negotiator. I didn't have to like give up anything, or enter any contract, but they were making their statements on why they had a right to be there. And then I gave counter arguments on why they could be out of there, so, and I had to,
galactic negotiations.
Yeah, I guess that's some of my legal background. And it just kind of flexed some authority of, no, I'm going to take them, whether you're happy about it or not. So it was just an impulse that I found. Another interesting experience is one time I was called to Pluto, and I wasn't even planning on going there. I just pinged there. And I realized, because I was standing kind of in a grayish planet and I saw the sun and all the other planets so far off, I'm like, is this Pluto? There's no way. Am I here? And then I had an experience on Pluto, and then I went up above the planet, and then I got a sense of the kind of the entry to the outer sphere, and I felt a calling to it. So I decided to keep just kind of, I'm going to go there. I'm going to experience this. So I kind of pushed through it, and then I started feeling like I couldn't breathe, like in my physical body. But then this impression told me just astral breathe. And then I started astral breathing, and then I can kind of get my bearings once I pass that, I'll call it a crust, to the outer planes. And I realized kind of the energetic laws were slightly different. The navigation system was a little bit different out there. And something told me, just use your inner star to navigate. And And it's interesting because I mentioned this story to two magicians, and one of them had said that, you have to use your inner star for navigation, kind of with different terminology. And that also, yes, you feel like you can't breathe.
I'm not familiar with, sorry, I'm not familiar with that. What do you mean by inner star?
So it's kind of, it sounds very ephemeral. So it's just a kind of a sensation that you have a star within, and that becomes like your control pad to navigate.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's kind of like, this becomes say it's like the gas for your spaceship, or it's the wheels of your spaceship.
Yeah, right. Okay. So the drive behind it. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. So, that's two wonderful examples of the benefits of this work. Yeah, I mean, that. If anything, that should show people the potential. My goodness, and I suppose as well, you've probably got a book full of experiences like that.
Several books.
On it goes. Yeah. Wow. Victoria, thank you so much for sharing, because that's, they're quite, personal experiences as well. So thank you for sharing those on the podcast as well. Is there anything else you'd like to add while we're on?
Yeah, in the last 8 minutes, I think we had a question on what are the 1 to 2 the most profound lessons you've learned from your study?
You are very technical. Yeah, I'm thinking we kind of already covered these, but you're like, no, this. All right, on you go.
So this one is going to be more mystical and more personal, but I found regardless of the magic, but what magic has kind of shown me is that the divine is always with me, and hence the divine is always with you. We are kind of contained within our current frame of consciousness, but when you touch eternity, you realize eternity is always with you. And I want to remind these listeners that eternity is always with you too. And you may not be able to realize that with kind of where your consciousness is registering right now, but once you're on the other side, once you touch eternity, you realize how short, how precious life is, how quickly everything goes by, but also that your highest self is always with you on one level of reality, guiding you. You are an eternal journeyer through creation. So just acknowledge that you're having this moment, you're having these experiences, you're having this incarnation, this lifetime, this opportunity to work on your development. But also, as you go through life has challenges, it has ups and downs. Realize that's part of life, but also you are a bigger being that is, standing behind all of creation, cheering you on, watching you, waiting for you. And also there's so many other spiritual beings on the other side who care about you and they want to see you succeed.
Wow. It's quite a message. Yeah, I feel better hearing that as well. Yeah, it's always good to have a reminder. Yeah, because we often, as much as we know it becomes sometimes the norm, doesn't it? So it's nice to hear it from another voice.
Yeah.
Wow. I'll ask you now. So is there anything else?
I don't think so. I could probably find something.
Yeah, because I think in many of our questions there we kind of overlapped, and you answered actually more in one, which is wonderful. You're like, nope, whatever happens, we are going to do each one. No, that's great. No, thank you so much for sharing all of that, because it's so nice to hear. Because, like you said, there's so many different ways of approaching this work, and we've got a multitude of people out there in the public eye doing it, and each individual at home doing it privately as well. It's a very personal thing with many shared areas as well. So it's great to hear your experience of doing it and your approach to doing it. For people who might want to follow you, sometimes you do publicize these stories, sometimes you put them out, sometimes you share your knowledge. Where can people find you?
Yeah, so you can find me on TikTok under Psyche Alchemica. It's kind of a mouthful.
I'll write all these down below.
Okay. Thank you. I also have a blog. I have it posted on for about a year, but it's mysteriummuse.com. Also, if you want to follow me on Facebook, my account's usually pretty private because I do share private magical things with people on there. But if you're listening, I don't know you, just send me a DM request. Let me know you heard about this podcast. I just kind of want to gatekeep a little bit that whoever I'm kind of sharing into more and more intimate aspects of my magical practice, that you have good intentions.
Absolutely. Awesome. That's great. That's great. Thank you so much. And I'm sure in the future there'll be other things for us to talk about. Perhaps we can invite you back if you're willing to come. We shall, I think we'll get this up within the next week or so. It'll be very quick.
Thank you. This was really fun and I appreciate it. And I'd be happy to do another interview. We'll have to come up with more questions.
Oh, don't worry. I've got loads. I had to pull them back. I don't want to flood you with too much, but I got literally hundreds. Yeah, we could do a season. All right, Victoria, thank you so much. And lovely that was our first conversation, so it's very nice to talk to you in real life. And we shall talk again soon, I'm sure.
Yes, thank you so much, James.
All right, thank you then. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.